Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our social critic hats to unpack some truly fascinating source material. We are going to explore a pretty provocative text that looks at how institutionalized religion actually manipulates the concept of love, and how ancient texts, when you read them as allegories instead of, literal history, actually point toward this beautiful, non-violent, internal enlightenment. So let's jump right in and explore this massive disconnect between what institutions preach and how love might actually work.
Right off the bat, this is the core question our source material poses. If a system is theoretically designed to elevate humanity and spread love, why does it so often just get bogged down by violence, literalism, and fundamentalist fear? The text basically argues that when we take spiritual metaphors as literal historical facts, that original message of love inevitably morphs into tribalism and division.
Section 1. The grounded airplane.
So this analysis completely reframes how we typically understand prayer and love. It suggests that prayer is kind of like an airplane. It's meant to connect our lower, earthly, physical reality to a higher, heavenly state of mind. But here's the absolutely crucial takeaway from the text. Heaven and earth aren't physical places up in the clouds or down in the dirt. They're actually states of consciousness, right inside of you. The argument here is that institutions have essentially forgotten how to fly. They're just repeating hollow words instead of doing the persistent internal meditation that's actually required to bridge that gap.
Section 2. When institutions breed hate.
When people take spiritual texts literally, the text argues that they end up constructing these literal war gods. And then, followers use those gods to justify stealing land, sparking wars, and totally blinding themselves to the empathy of others. The source draws this really relatable comparison to childhood conditioning, like growing up watching movies and cheering for the cavalry to defeat Native Americans, completely unaware of the empathy we actually owe to people who are just defending their sacred homes. It's a pretty striking example of how a system can literally condition humanity to hate, all while convincing us that we're the righteous ones.
According to the analysis, this points to a really deep hypocrisy often found in institutional prejudice, especially when it comes to homophobia. The text highlights the intense irony of religious fundamentalists condemning homosexuality while relying super heavily on figures who were, themselves, gay. Think about it. Leonardo da Vinci painted The Last Supper, Michelangelo sculpted iconic figures for the Vatican, and King James authorized literally the most famous English translation of the Bible. The argument here is that institutionalized hate isn't just destructive, it's deeply hypocritical because it ignores the diverse realities of the exact people who built its foundations.
Section 3. Decoding the inner light.
Now, the critique argues that a lot of ancient scriptures are actually maps for internal enlightenment, just disguised as stories. Take the fall of Lucifer in Isaiah 14, for example. The word Lucifer literally translates to star or light. So from an Eastern mystical perspective, this isn't a story about a physical demon falling out of the sky. The 5 I wills actually represent our 5 carnal senses: sight, taste, touch, smell, and hearing. The fall is just the collapse of higher consciousness down into our ego-driven lower mind. Because the second the ego says, I will do this, regardless of what you want, well, that's exactly where division and war begin.
Diving a bit deeper, the analysis connects these ancient allegories straight to human biology, specifically the pineal gland. Ancient mystics actually referred to this as the single eye, or allegorically as Aries the ram. And there's this fascinating connection in Genesis where Jacob wrestles with God face to face and names the place Peniel. According to the text, this has nothing to do with outward religious appeasement. It's an ancient coded reference to an internal biological enlightenment happening right inside the human brain. This perspective completely flips entire religious traditions on their head. Instead of historical literalism, which, resulted in the actual sacrifice and burning of real animals, the mystical interpretation is entirely internal. The lamb, or ram, isn't a farm animal at all. It's the pineal gland. And the burnt offering represents this beautiful scientific mythology where spiritual energy, much like the sun, rises up the spine to illuminate the right hemisphere of the brain, bringing this sort of springtime of new consciousness to the individual.
Section 4. The instinct of oneness.
The text then shifts gears to flip the script on obedience and love, using this incredible Persian myth. In the story, Lucifer refuses God's command to bow to humans. But here's the twist. He doesn't do it out of spite. He does it out of a pure, agonizing, and completely uncompromising love for God, feeling like he just cannot bow to anything else. The poets ask, by what power is Satan sustained? And the answer is, by his memory of the sound of God's voice. It's a wild thought, right? It illustrates that true love can be so deep and so consuming that it completely defies basic institutional compliance.
And that theme of consuming surrender, it is perfectly captured in the Sufi metaphor of the moth and the flame. The moth is fascinated by the light. It flutters near it, survives just long enough to share its beauty with others, but ultimately it returns to throw itself right into the fire. It ceases to be a moth and literally becomes the flame itself. Paired with the metaphor of a dewdrop falling into the ocean, this just beautifully illustrates the ultimate surrender required to truly become one with the universe.
Now, this mystical oneness isn't just some poetic idea. The analysis argues that it manifests in our everyday human reality. Take the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. He asks, why would a person risk their own life to pull a total stranger from a burning car? Well, because in a state of emergency, this deeply coded instinct just explodes within us. It's a sudden, unshakable recognition that you and that stranger are, in fact, one. By saving them, you are literally saving yourself.
Section 5. Love as social action.
So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, this framework of love demands action. The text draws heavily on the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., written from his Birmingham jail cell back in 1963. He expressed this really profound disappointment that institutions meant to be the moral guardians of society are instead hiding behind stained glass windows in silence, essentially preserving immoral suppression. True love in this context absolutely refuses to comply with an unjust mob.
Institutional compliance so often relies on the clenched fist, on violence, or on just cowardly silence. But individualized love? That relies on the open hand. Leaders like MLK Jr. and Gandhi brought heavily armed, totally oppressive societies to their knees without firing a single shot. They packed the ultimate power of the universe into an open hand and nonviolent unity, proving that higher consciousness is just an unstoppable force. The text then draws this frankly chilling parallel between ancient allegory and modern history. In the Bible, God takes Moses to the mountaintop to see the Promised Land, and shortly after that, he dies. Fast forward to the 1960s, MLK Jr. declares to his congregation, "I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the Promised Land," and the very next day he is assassinated. The source presents this as the ultimate sacrifice of the individual who makes true contact with higher consciousness and actually brings that revolutionary power down to earth.
Which brings us right to the psychological core of this entire critique, echoing Carl Jung's ultimate directive, individuate. To find true love, to find enlightenment and real connection, you have to break free from the mob mentality of institutions. You don't need the approval of a fearful collective. You have to find that light, that pineal spark, completely within yourself.
And that leaves us with a pretty massive, provocative question to think about. Will we continue to safely comply with the war gods of literalism, building walls of hate and division, or are we going to do the hard, persistent work of individuation, breaking away from the mob to ignite peace within our own minds? It's a truly fascinating framework for examining humanity and the true nature of love. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep seeking that inner light.